And there's intimacy on the radio, and there's naturalness on the radio that can never be replicated on TV. The marvelous resurgence of radio as a political force in this country.
News-related radio programming is evolving.
There's a huge hole in our dialogue that can be filled by the synthesis of traditional radio and the freedom that comes from a live podcast. You're about to experience Cowboy State Politics live. Here we go. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to another tremendous installment from very high above all the insipid and puerile forms of Wyoming mainstream media. This is Cowboy State Politics. I, of course, am your illustrious host, David Iverson, firmly ensconced behind the silver Cowboy State Politics microphone and broadcasting to you from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics Studio in Sheridan, Wyoming. Good morning, my friends, and welcome to the program. Happy Thursday, 5 days before the Wyoming 2026 primary election. You know, it doesn't seem like it's really been that long, has it? All right. Every time you watch TV, I mean, you're inundated with political ads, some of which are credible, most of which are not. But you know, the campaign season in Wyoming is relatively short, and August always comes pretty quick. So anyway, we're going to cover a couple of different things today on the program. First, the Wyoming GOP chairman, Bryan Miller, is going to join me at the top of the hour at 9 o'clock. That's something we've been doing pretty much every election for, well, let's see here. Since I started the program, really. Of course, it wasn't Chairman Miller then. It was Chairman Frank Ethorn. But every election, the week before the election, we set up an interview and just kind of talk about the where things stand, what the chairman thinks, what's going on with the party. And this year, I mean, there's a number of things to talk about. If you haven't noticed, the media has slacked off the barrage of attacks against the party. You know, ever since the convention I guess it wasn't the convention. It was a statewide state central committee meeting, and they endorsed several candidates. Now, a couple of interesting points about that before we get to the controversy. They kind of gave the middle finger to President Trump. And maybe that's a little bit harsh, but they didn't endorse program, and you'll lose connection. So sorry about that. Now, I don't know where we lost connection, but let's back up and discuss the endorsements from the party again. So it wasn't that long ago that the Wyoming media was apoplectic about all of the endorsements coming from the Wyoming GOP. And the interesting thing about that is the Wyoming GOP rebuffed Trump's pick for governor, for very good reason, too. she's not the most conservative person in the race. That would be Brent Bean. Now, is Megan more conservative than Eric Barlow? Yeah, but that's not really saying a whole heck of a lot. My left pinky is more conservative than Eric Barlow. My left shoe, way more conservative than Eric Barlow. Right. The truth is, most people are more conservative than Eric Barlow. And so, I mean, given the choices, definitely I would choose Megan Felder over Eric Barlow. But she is not the most conservative person in the race. And that is Brent Bean, which is why the Wyoming GOP endorsed him. Similarly, the Wyoming GOP endorsed Chuck Gray for the U.S. House of Representatives. And, I mean, Chuck has been tremendously effective, both in the House of Representatives and as Secretary of State. I don't think that you could make an argument that there has been a more effective Secretary of State. Now, when you're effective, well, a lot of criticism comes with that. And, most of the and it's funny, the Wyoming media and, all the talking heads say, well, Chuck Gray's got a lot of negatives, but they never tell you what those are. The negatives that they're referring to are all of the things about Chuck Gray's agenda that the leftist media in Wyoming doesn't like. Things like voter ID, pen and paper ballots, election integrity, those sorts of things. Now, of course, the leftists in Wyoming, which, by the way, they are no different than the National Democrat Party, except that they're not quite as vocal as some of the wackos in the National Democrat Party. But make no mistake, their agenda is largely the same, and it always revolves around power. That is, getting power, maintaining power, taking power from those people that you don't. I mean, of course, the media are going to like anything that Chuck Gray does. But when you look at all of the things that he has accomplished, there's numerous pieces of election integrity legislation. And when he was in the Wyoming House, he got voter ID through, and I think he had left the House by this point. But we got the crossover voting ban, which, as we've all noticed in this election, the media just shifted gears. And now they ran full page ads, quarter page ads, front page ads, Facebook, so all manner of social media ads telling you that you had to change your party affiliation by May 14th. Which, as I told you yesterday, that really didn't matter a whole heck of a lot, because grand total, there was only about 2,000 people across the entire state of Wyoming that switched from the Democrat Party to the Republican Party, or unaffiliated to Republican. Now, the reason for that, and don't get too excited about that, because the only thing that really tells you is most of the Democrats in Wyoming are already in the Republican Party. So, their media push was only to capture those few people that they could, convince to join the Republican Party. But, getting that crossover voting ban in place was a huge step, because no longer can you go to the polls on, well, I guess this time it would be next Tuesday on the 18th. Well, you can't go there anymore and change your party affiliation. And for good reason, because primary elections are private elections. You have to be a Republican to participate in primary elections. Now, I have an op-ed in the stack of stuff advocating for open primaries, and so I'm going to save that discussion until we get to the op-ed. But for now, the Republican primary is a private election for a private organization known as the Republican Party. And so why can't Democrats participate? Because it's not for Democrats. It's only for one of the two major parties in this state, that being the Republican Party. Now, if Democrats want to, have a more effective primary and have a larger say in electoral politics, well, then they need to do a better job. Now, as I also pointed out yesterday, do not underestimate the influence of the Democrat Party in this election, because I'm absolutely certain that they are on the rise. I'm not going to say that they're ascendant or anything, because I think that has connotations with it that makes them out to be more than what they are. But they do have a lot of candidates. I think they have a candidate for all 5 of the top the top statewide elected offices, and for many, many, many other offices. If you've paid attention to the Wyoming turkey vulture, really, it's turned into the Wyoming Democrat Party apparatus, media apparatus. On the front page, there's all sorts of puff pieces about Democrat candidates. And there are other Democrat candidates running in other places in the state. So you compare that to last election. Last election, there really weren't that many Democrats. I mean, there was a few here or there, and I think that they had, they may have had a candidate for Secretary of State or U.S. representative, but, and maybe they had I don't remember if they had a gubernatorial candidate or not. But the point is, they didn't have near as many. And so what that shows you, and by the way, this is a good thing. What that shows you is that the Democrat Party in Wyoming is on the rise. Now, why do I say that it's a good thing? Because it allows us to have a more honest discussion. Right now, we have two groups in the Republican Party, and they're very, very clear. All you have to do is spend 10 minutes on social media, and you'll be able to pick them out. The group that gets attacked relentlessly, yep, generally speaking, those are conservatives. There are some exceptions because there are some pretty active conservatives campaigning against their opponent. But for the most part, the people that get attacked relentlessly are conservative Republicans. And the people doing the attacking? Yeah, most of those are really, really left-leaning Democrats who can't spell. And I mean, that's what it is. And so the political discussion usually goes something like this. I'm more Republican than you are. No, I'm still a Republican. I can say that I can identify any way that I want. I am the true Republican. And then the other folks will say, well, I'm the conservative out of the bunch. And it goes back and forth. And it's really not an honest discussion because most of the people on the Wyoming political left in the Republican Party advocate and vote for things that are just antithetical to the Republican Party platform. Look at Marilyn Connolly. In the last budget session, she voted for $1.241 billion in additional spending. That's over and above what was already in the budget, which was a heck of a lot of cash. Connolly voted for $1.241 billion more. Now, Connolly, at the Sheridan County GOP debate, she swore up and down that she was a conservative. I've been a Republican I don't know. I've been a Republican for 7. I've been a Republican for a long time. It's basically what it came out as. But the point being is that she has not been a Republican for a really long time. Now, of course, been in the Republican Party, but if you look at her spending, piece of cake. If you look at education policy, let's spend as much as we possibly can because dollars equal quality. Well, the truth is, if you look at Wyoming's national education scores, we're slightly above mediocre. Now, the argument you hear from all the education folks is, well, we're ahead of most of the United States. Most of the United States is barely doing the minimum. And so claiming that you're better than everybody else is a lot like saying you're the cream of the crap. And I don't mean to insult teachers. I don't. I'm talking about the educational scores. Now, there are a lot of things that go into that. We have a lot of testing that happens, and there's a lot of mandates. And in an ideal world, I would say that we should just let teachers teach. The whole idea in having schools in different parts of the state is that those schools focus on what happens in different parts of the state. If you're living in an agricultural community, it stands to reason that you would have a pretty good ag program, you would think. If you're in a manufacturing center in the state, maybe you're down in Cheyenne, maybe you're going to have a awesome metal shop. Or maybe the community is just a bunch of carpenters. Maybe they're that's what they do. Well, then you might have a good wood shop. My point being is that if in an ideal world we could allow teachers to teach, well, then that would be perfect. But the problem is that we have highly liberal influences happening at pretty much every level of education, from DEI to the LGBTQ, ZXP, WDS agenda. And so it's very difficult to keep that bullcrap out of the classroom. And so sometimes you have to have laws passed in Cheyenne to fix a lot of that stuff. And so When you're talking about education policy and your legislator votes for leaving pornography in libraries, it's just spending way more money, just continue to throw cash at it like Steve Harshman has always done. Well, then you can't really have an honest discussion because those same people advocating for those same things claim to be a Republican. Now, if we had a stronger Democrat Party and all those people who really are Democrats were actually in the Democrat Party, then we could have an honest debate with the Democrats versus the Republicans. And when you get to the end of the election in November, you have an honest debate between two competing philosophies. And right now, we don't have that. And so while I say don't underestimate the Democrats, what I mean is you better get out and vote because in some races, if not, you're going to end up with a Democrat in that office. And so it's really important to make sure that you make this election too big to rig. Because there's a lot of people that want to see this state turn just the deepest shade of blue that you can find. Now, I don't think that that'll happen, but I think that it will. There is a distinct possibility that it will shift way more purple. And my friends, if you like the cash in your bank account, if you don't like paying more for everyday things like groceries, if you don't like your school district shoving all sorts of things down your kid's throat that you probably have no idea about, well, then you better get out and vote. Because if you don't, we're going to end up with a lot of really horrible crap. And by the way, we'll probably talk about some of this with Chairman Miller when he joins the program at the top of the hour. But some good news, my friends, that came out yesterday. Reed Reisner has come out with his list of endorsements. Now, again, I think that Reed Reisner is the only person in Wyoming elections. He has done one thing that no other Wyoming politician has ever been able to do successfully, and that is unite the entire state against him. And so Reed Reisner has come out with a list of endorsements, which, by the way, Reed, keep them coming, man. You're so irritating on social media and in television ads that I think pretty much everybody that you endorse, voters are going to vote for the opposite of that. Vote for their challenger. So Reed's list of people that you should vote against begins number one on the list with Douglas Moore, who is running against John Bear over in Gillette. If there wasn't a better, the only way that you could get better than this is if Gail Simmons endorsed Doug Moore, and I'm sure she probably has. But that would be the only way that you could get better. So Reed, good on it. Awesome for telling everybody in Gillette who not to vote for. Now, and a note about all these candidates. Have you noticed, and maybe I should have talked about this more during the election, but have you noticed that most of the candidates that are running against conservatives are the establishment elitists? Have you noticed that? All of them have been on boards. They're all, former county commissioners. Steve Harshman, he is the epitome of an elitist insider. But have you noticed that? And the interesting thing about it is all these people will tell you, well, you have to vote for people with experience. I have the experience. I've been on a zillion different boards. Well, the truth is, when a conservative tries to get on these boards, it doesn't really matter what it is, the board of the dump or the board of the museum or the hospital board, the museum board, whatever. It doesn't really matter which board it is. You're probably going to be told no, because one of their redcoat cronies is going to step right in there. And so when the election comes around, they're going to say, well, you have to vote for the candidate that has experience. Well, the only way to get experience is to be on boards. And the people that control the boards make it certain that you can't get any experience. You see how this works? Big, giant, circular candidate machine. But that's what they say. And most of these people, and you can pick them out, they're the folks that don't show up to debates, like Doug Moore. They're the type of people that have been involved in pretty much every redcoat idea. Like, oh, I love this one, business development. Don't you just love that one? It has such a good ring to it. But people like Doug Moore, and there's several others on here, are all about government getting involved in business development. Well, the first thing is that's not the role of government. Government is supposed to be separate from business. When government gets involved, you end up picking winners and losers. And that is, we're going to give your tax dollars to this business over here, regardless of the fact that there is another business competing with them that you're not going to give any money to. Great example of that in Sheridan is the taxi service. Last I checked, there were, I think there's actually 2 taxi services in Sheridan. Those are private, and if you stand on a street corner long enough, you'll see one of their taxis go by. But the city government and the county give a tremendous amount of money to this thing called Goose Creek Transit. That's the public taxi service. They've got these really nice buses. They're all bright and shiny, and they've got really nice paintings on the side of them. But they do the exact same thing as the private taxi service. And so city and county government give a crap load of money to Goose Creek Transit, but these other guys, the other 2 taxi services in town, now they have to do it on their own. Now, that is in no way fair. If the Goose Creek Transit in Sheridan, as it's called, is so great and they do such a great job, they should compete in the free market. They should have to compete with the other 2 taxi services, and whichever one of them is better will win. That's the way our system works. But it is not how liberal establishment elitists want to set things up. And so, a lot of these people, Doug Moore definitely in there. He was on the Parks and Recreation Board, I think. And when all of his campaign announcements came out, all of them said, Douglas Moore is a conservative. Mm-hmm. Well, if he truly is, why would you run against John Bear? There's only a few people in the House of Representatives that have a more conservative record than John. One of those is Agent 29, but there aren't that many. So if it is true that Douglas Moore is a conservative, why is he running against John Bear? That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Except, of course, that Douglas Moore, the no-show candidate, he's not really a conservative. I hate to tell you this. He's one of those establishment elitists from the insiders in Campbell County. Here's another one. I know this one is going to shock you. Ogden Driscoll. Reed Reisner says if you live in Crook, Weston, or in Campbell County, you have to vote for Ogden Driscoll. I think this is a perfect reason not to vote for him because Reed Reisner likes him. But let me give you another reason. Just, let's see here. Actually, I don't have it lined up. But you remember what Ogden Driscoll said at the debate? That abortion's okay, if the fetus isn't a good one. You remember that? That was just yesterday or the day before. Well, the truth is that if Reed Reisner says you should vote for Ogden Driscoll, you should definitely not. You should run away screaming and vote for Chip Diamond. Just saying. The next one. Christopher Drizang. Oh, Christopher Drizang is the epitome of one of the education insiders. He's I don't know if he's the superintendent he's pretty high up in school administration. And though he's wised up this election, last time around, his website read like a government bureaucrat's best dream. That it was all more funding for schools, local control, all of that stuff. And by the way, I'm in favor of local control when they're following the law, when they're doing things that they're supposed to be doing, when they're not cramming ideologically irrelevant crap down kids' throats, when they're not focusing on stupid stuff like sexual identity in school. And if you're one of those people that says, all that stuff doesn't happen in Wyoming, yeah, it does. I've done several episodes of how it absolutely does happen in Wyoming schools. And there's a pretty good reason for that because Wyoming equality, one of the main missions of Sarah Burlingame when she left the House of Representatives was to set up I don't know what they call it now, but it used to be the Gay Straight Alliance in every school in Wyoming. And she has been remarkably effective. And public schools just kind of give her free reign over the pace because it's equality, right? It's important. We have to have equality. It's a bunch of crap, my friends. It's sexual identity that is being shoved down your kid's throat. And Mr. Christopher Drizang is all about that. And this is lessons learned, my friends. Every election I say, I'm going to go take screenshots of all this stuff before they take it down. And this is one case I wish I would have because he had some crazy stuff on his website. Now, the truth is he's running against Tony Locke. Tony is, I really like Tony Locke. If you're happy that you didn't have to pay as much in property taxes, you should probably thank Tony Locke. That guy is the head of the spear when it comes to reforming our property tax system. I mean, pretty much every amendment that came out, every tax reform bill, you could bet that it was Tony Locke that I was out in front of that. Now, Christopher Drazang, he would raise your taxes big time. I mean, anytime you hear a candidate say, "We need more money for schools," more taxes. Schools have to have money for athletics, more taxes. And I mean, anytime you hear any of that, we're public services, more taxes. By the way, are your public services any better than they were 5 years ago or 10 years ago? I mean, can you notice a marked increase in the quality of your public service in the past 5 or 10 years? My guess would be no, but all these candidates will continue to scream that we absolutely have to have more money for services, which means more in taxes. What about old Bob Short? Robert Short, candidate for Secretary of State, promised to come on Cowboy state politics at least 2 months ago and never returned a message. Now, Robert Short is, that guy, when I talked to him, I met him down at the Third Thursday event in Sheridan. And I just walked up, introduced myself, and I said, "I'd like you to come on the program." And he says, and I quote, "That's fine if I don't ask me any stupid questions like abortion." Well, I think that abortion is kind of an important topic. And he goes, "I don't. It's irrelevant." And by the way, I have all this recorded, and I could play the exchange for you. I have to go dig it up, but I've got it. And I said, "Well, you know what? I don't think that's irrelevant because I think it tells voters exactly who the candidate is. I mean, your view of the unborn tells us exactly how you're going to treat people who are all grown, wouldn't you think?" And he just continued to insist that it was irrelevant. But anyway, at the end of the conversation, he agreed to come on Cowboy State Politics. And as you can see, he never did. He never responded to a message, nor did his campaign staff. Probably the reason for that is if you check his campaign financing, you'll find out that he got some big donations from some Democrats. It's because Robert Short is not a conservative. He is one of these insider types that really would be better suited to be in the Democrat Party. Christy Racinas, so says Reed Racer. I have no problem with Christy Racinas. I actually kind of like her. But she's the only person running for auditor. So, you don't really have a choice there. Kurt Meyer. Kurt Meyer wants to take $100 million of your money and set up another trust fund and continually dump about $50 to $60 million every year into it, as if the $30 billion that we have stashed away isn't enough. Kurt Meyer wants to take more of your cash and set up what he calls his generational fund. My friends, we don't need another trust fund. We need to make government smaller. We need to stop stealing taxpayers' money and putting it into accounts that the people who paid for it are not really going to see the dividends of. The truth is, my friends, when you take more money, when you have money left over from taxes, right? Like the only acceptable use of the tax dollar is to pay for those things that are absolutely essential for government. That's the only acceptable use of taxpayer dollars. But when you have an excess, it means that you've overtaxed people. And the truth is, in Wyoming, we have overtaxed our citizens to the tune of $30 billion. Kurt Meyer wants $100 million more. Why not, Kurt? I really like his opponent, Scott Smith. Scott's been on the program a number of times. Evie Brennan. Ooh, now this one I have some real heartburn with. On the Open Range Record, we ran a piece about her record when it comes to protecting children. That is, every bill that would make life more difficult for sexual predators and sexual offenders, Evie Brennan voted against it. Every single one of them. And there might be a good reason for that, because you can go to the Open Range Record and you can read this entire article. But the truth is, her husband's a sex offender. And so maybe that's why she voted against all of it. I've heard from a couple of different legislators that she openly lobbied against some critical pieces of legislation. One of those was from Agent 29. He got this really great bill passed last session, in which if there is a custody dispute between parents, and one of whom is a sex offender, the presumption goes to the parent who is not a sex offender. That is, can't have any unsupervised visits and those sorts of things. Seems pretty common sense to me. Evie Brennan voted against it. Now, her challenger, Daniel Singh, he's got a really solid voting record, really solidly conservative. And you can look back at it. On pretty much every index, he's near the top. We definitely don't want to be voting for people that protect predators. Wendy Schuler. Now, Wendy Schuler is borderline communist. Look at her voting record. Go to Evidence-Based Wyoming, go to WyoVote, go to WyoRhino. Any of them will show you exactly who Wendy Schuler is. She very much voted against gun legislation. That's a big deal. That is one of her things when I think it was the ban on gun-free zones came out. She absolutely voted against it. So if you like your guns, don't be voting for Wendy Schuler. And by the way, all of these people on Reed Reisner's list seem to be the opposite of what Reed Reisner has campaigned on. That he's the solid pro-Trump candidate. Fortunately for all of us, he's not going to win the election. But it's completely the opposite of everything that Reed Reisner has campaigned on the last few months. Fascinating how they always show their colors, isn't it, my friends? Melissa Butcher, in Senate 21. That's Agent 29's opponent. Definitely a socialist. Her claim to fame is with the Chamber of Communists. She's been very involved in this whole business development thing in Sheridan County. And, the Chamber of Communists, they continually get money from the city and from the county. And Melissa Butcher is one of those people that believes that government ought to be involved in business, which is interesting because Melissa Butcher owns 2 businesses. And I'm sure she would absolutely be in favor of government giving her business a whole heck of a lot of money and not, her competition. I don't know if there's another bakery in Ranchester. That's where she lives. But definitely not Melissa Butcher. And Lisa Engerbretson from Senate District 29. Now, she also claims to be a conservative, but she's dead set right in the middle of the pack with all of her redcoat buddies down in Casper. And she's running against Bob Ide. Bob Ide has one, if not the most conservative, one of the most conservative voting records in the Wyoming Senate. He's done a tremendous job. And this is another example of, if the guy you're running against is a conservative and you're a conservative, why would you run against him? Well, the truth is that Lisa Engerbretson is not a conservative, which is why Reed Reisner endorsed her. So anyway, my friends, Reed Reisner's endorsements, buddy, keep it up, my friend. I think that if you just continue to endorse all of our people, the possibility of us winning the election just went up. Because nobody wants to vote for you, as we've proven over and over. Back in a minute. The calendar says that it's summer, and you believe it. Well, that's just so cute. But you obviously haven't lived here very long, have you? And you probably think that the weather is just going to continue to warm up. You don't have to worry about snow or ice or 30-degree temperatures anymore. In case you've forgotten, this is Wyoming, my friend, and that sort of thinking doesn't work here. 1 minute, it could be 75 and sunny, and 10 minutes later, snow. Whatever the weather, you need a pair of socks that'll keep your feet cool and dry even on the hottest of summer days. And if you happen to run into that freak midsummer snowstorm, trust me, it's happened. I've seen it. You'll stay nice and toasty warm. Well, your feet anyway. To get you a pair, go to the website, thebuffalowoolco.com. Trust me, you won't be disappointed. These are the finest socks that I've ever put on my feet. Are you one of those people that said something like this before Trump became president?
I have a house in Spain that is going to be ready right after the election.
Siberia, Nova Scotia.
I'm definitely moving to Canada.
Straight to hell. Iceland.
France.
Asia's pretty cool.
And has the last year and a half been more than you could bear? Well, if it has, you've come to the right place. Call my friend Rebecca Bextel at eXp Realty. She has her fingers on the pulse of the real estate market all across the state of Wyoming. Last year, she sold around $30 million worth of property. Everything from small residential properties all the way up to big giant ranches. So if you've got to get the heck out of Dodge, if you've got to be gone Johnson because you can't stand that Trump is the president, call Rebecca Bextel. Her phone number is 307-699-3519. Let me say that one more time for you in case you missed it. 307-699-3519.
I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day, don't you? Well, I can show you how. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day. I'm only gonna get stronger.
This is Cowboy State Politics on a Thursday. Thank you for watching, my friends. Thank you for everything you do for Cowboy State Politics. This program, Cowboy State Politics Live, the podcast, which you can find everywhere, and of course, the Open Range Record. Thank you for everything you do, my friends. So I just turned on my soundbite machine over here, and there is a soundbite right on top of it that I think, I have no idea what it is. You know, one of the things that I do is on this device over here, I've got sound bites for just about every program that I've done. And I just kind of continue rotating them through. I'm a big fan of not recreating the wheel. Well, when I get to a date where I've already had a program, well, maybe there's another sound bite that's already in there. And this one is entitled Barlow Abortion. Now, so I can only imagine what this one is. So let's go ahead and listen to it. Just out of curiosity, who knows what we're going to find? Here we go.
Thank you very much. Senator Barlow.
Got to find the question here. Sorry. Do you agree it's a statement? Absolutely. Absolutely. I believe in life, and I voted multiple times for life in the Wyoming legislature. Now, we all know the legal landscape. We can talk about the moral conviction. Absolutely. Unapologetically. The legal landscape changed in 2022. Let's just be clear about that. And so since 2022, the Wyoming legislature has taken up numerous efforts, and I've been a part of those, to advance this absolute viewpoint. Now, in some of those, there were exceptions, because in the legislative process, you actually have to bring people on board. You actually have to advance policy. And so you can look at my record. My record is solid. And folks that have questioned my record, even on the Senate floor, have found themselves having to say, "Oh, not so fast." Eric is unapologetically pro-life, but for exceptions in the legislative process, I don't want any exceptions, but in the legislative process, to advance things, meaningful things, so we don't have additional loss of life, so we don't have hang-ups and hiccups, which, as we are dealing with right now, there are times when you have to build consensus around some things. I don't want those, except maybe for me personally, the life of the mother. Other than that, I wouldn't look for anything else. But that's not the way the legislative process works sometimes, folks. For me personally, every life is precious.
Except for life
from conception till natural death. Thank you, Nathan.
Thank you.
Okay, so here's the deal about this, and I think I discussed this yesterday. When you hear somebody say, well, you know, you got to have exceptions, especially life of the mother. What you think that means is, well, there's some sort of emergency that happens in the delivery room, and the doctor is sitting there going, crap. I can only save the baby or the mother. We're going to go with the mother. Okay, so first of all, that's not a question of abortion. That's a question of triage. Any doctor is going to look at that and say, okay, who do I have the greatest chance of saving? Hopefully you can save both, but that's not a question of abortion. It's a question of triage. Secondly, that is not what abortion advocates refer to when they say life of the mother. What they're referring to is, well, you're 45 and this is a high-risk pregnancy, and it could put you at risk. It might endanger your life. That is what abortion advocates are referring to. Well, it's just really high risk, and you don't know what's going to happen here. That is the exception they're looking for. And so when you have, quote unquote, life of the mother in any sort of abortion legislation, it is a wide open loophole that you could drive a Mack truck through. That's why they put it in there. So that really, when it comes down to it, all you got to do is say, well, my life is being threatened. Sorry, got to do it. That's exactly what it's for. And so when you hear politicians like Ogden Driscoll or like Eric Barlow, well, then that's exactly what they mean. And these folks have been in office long enough that they know exactly what they're talking about. This isn't their first rodeo. The episode that I did, I guess it would be on Monday, about Ogden Driscoll, where he says, well, maybe if the fetus isn't a good one, we could do away with it. That too, he was talking about exceptions. Now, how many times do you think Eric Barlow or Ogden Driscoll have talked about abortion on the floor? A lot. Maybe 20, maybe 30. I don't know. Eric Barlow's been in there for 14 years, and I don't even know how many abortion bills have come up during that time. So both of them know that it's a politically charged topic, that they got to be really careful of what they say, and they absolutely know what the arguments are. And so when they say stuff like what you just heard Barlow say, or Ogden Driscoll when he says the whole, unless it's a good one, yeah, they know exactly what they're talking about. Okay, so on yesterday's edition of the podcast, I told you about how the Cowboy had an article that was all about the gubernatorial campaign financing. And they made a big deal. It's right smack dab in the middle of the article, saying that Eric Barlow only got $6,500 worth of donations from political action committees. And now, if you go look at that article right now, it doesn't say that anymore. Because after I published the episode yesterday, they went in and stealth edited their article. Now, what I mean by stealth edit is they don't put an editor's note up at the top that says we originally reported that X, and so we've changed it, or this is the correct thing. They don't put a notice at the top of the article. They don't issue a retraction. They go in and they just change the text of what was said in the article. Let me prove it to you. And I've got screenshots of the original one, and I've got screenshots of what they changed it to. Naughty cow pie. Okay, so this one, yeah, the screen's going to look a little weird for a minute, but just roll with it. Here we go. Whoa! All right, so here it is. This one here on the left is the original reporting, and it says, Barlow's reports show much less from political action committees at $6,500. Okay, that's not at all true, and that's what partly yesterday's episode was about. The truth is that Barlow took north of $220,000 from political action committees, the bulk of which came from this political action committee run by one of the guys at Cyclone Drilling, and it's called the Civil Leadership PAC. Now, later on in the day, here is what the Cowboy changed that sentence to. Barlow's reports show $234,750 in Wyoming PAC money and $5,500 from federal out-of-state PAC money. So not only are the figures in their original version not even close to accurate, they didn't even get the federal PAC numbers right. Now, here's why this is important. The original version was meant to convince you that Barlow's funding came mostly from grassroots people, mostly from fundraising inside Wyoming. That was the whole purpose behind it. And I mean, don't think this is just the thing, right? We've all been in this business for long enough that really very, very few things are actually an accident. The truth is that the cow pie intentionally wrote that to convince you that most of Eric Barlow's campaign money came from private donations. That was the purpose behind it. Now, it's not stated in the article, and again, you could say that that's my opinion, but we've all been in this business long enough that you can smell you can smell something rotten in the state of the cow pie. And it probably is. So they changed it to say, well, actually, he took $234,000 and $5,500 from federal PACs. That's a very big difference. And they didn't put a notice at the top of the article. They didn't issue a retraction. Nobody at the cow pie said, hey, we goofed up. We originally reported this. It's actually this. Because they want you to believe that everything that they report is absolutely the truth every time. Well, you're smart enough to know that anybody who says that they never make a mistake is completely talking out of their southern end. But truth is, cow pie, nice try, guys, but we caught you. All right, so let's see here. What do we got? All right, 15 minutes left. Yeah, I think we can talk about Tom Love now. Oh, you know what? Let's do this. So this morning, I published an op-ed by Governor Mark Gordon, and this is, man, I got to tell you, I kind of agree with him. Now, his op-ed is called "Wyoming Doesn't Need More Mudslinging." And let me just read you, let's see here. First of all, he talked about his relationship with Foster Freeze. And they actually had a pretty down and dirty election. There were a lot of Democrat shenanigans that happened, which he kind of alludes to in this. Let's see here. Here we go. This is about halfway through the article. He says, and I quote, "This election, similar to the one 2 years ago, has amplified the sorts of big city, big money, nasty half-truths and flat-out lies or falsehoods that have become all too common in other states. It's not the Wyoming I know. Here, we respect the code of the West, and most candidates always work to discourage that sort of campaigning. They understood it was offensive to Wyoming people who pretty well know right from wrong. Contrast is one thing, but bearing false witness is taboo for a population that appreciates all 10 of the commandments." Now, that is the part that I absolutely agree with. And I do agree with his sentiment. You know, if you're campaigning on, for whatever office, it doesn't really matter what it is, and you lie about your opponent, like knowingly bearing false witness, that's wrong, and you shouldn't do that. Now, what Gordon's point here is, it's one thing to say, hey, look, this guy voted for this bill, and here's what it would do, and the rest of his record reflects that. It's not conservative, and then you make your argument. That's one thing. But saying that people did things that they didn't do, that's wrong. Now, offhand, there was one ad I saw last night from Steve Freeze. Well, they were played back to back. One of them says Steve Freeze is a never Trumper, and I never discussed this with him in our interview. So to tell you the truth, I don't know. But anyway, the ad claims that he supported Liz Cheney, and he was a never Trumper. Well, right after it is an ad that was paid for and approved by Steve Freeze, and it straight up calls whomever said it a liar. And actually, I think it calls Chuck Gray a liar, which I don't believe that Chuck Gray would do that. You'd have to prove that to me. But that's the sort of campaigning we need to get away from. You can make arguments about your opponent all day long, but don't lie. That's what redcoats do. And when I lived in Colorado, going to school at Regis University, I hated election season, because it was just TV ad after TV ad, and they were the nastiest, dirtiest, mudslinging ads that you could think of. I mean, it was, and I don't remember, okay, so maybe 4 or 6 years ago, there wasn't nearly as many television ads. Were campaigns just as dirty? Yeah, absolutely they were. But my argument is they shouldn't be. And the truth is, American politics have always been loud. They have always been raucous. And even going back to our founding, they were that way. Thomas Jefferson and John Adams was one of the dirtiest campaigns. John Adams accused Thomas Jefferson of wanting to fill the White House with French prostitutes. Jefferson accused John Adams of being a hermaphrodite. Okay, pretty strong language back in the early 1800s. But our politics has always kind of been that way. And, people take their politics to be very, very personal. And that's why attacks get as personal. The governor goes on. Where has that sensibility gone? This election, we've been abused by cynical political operatives whose stock in trade is to twist facts and foment suspicion with incomplete, dishonest tales and misinformation. Now, he could be referring to me, but of course, I can back up everything that I say. But he never calls anybody out in the op-ed. It's just, hey, I don't like these dirty campaign tactics. Especially galling are out-of-state political operatives who get paid big bucks for duping voters. I hope their vilification is misplaced in the Cowboy state. Wyoming voters are honest and they care. I believe voters will see through the baloney that passes for politics elsewhere and will come to rest on those candidates who know what they are talking about, know and care about Wyomingites, and know what is important to Wyoming. I couldn't agree more. I hope that is the case. And the truth is, you're sophisticated enough that you can, people can spot bull crap from a mile away, especially, and when it comes to politicians, our attention is peaked, and most of us have got the bullshit-o-meter turned up to level 10, trying to figure out who's telling us the truth and who isn't. And so I think that most people, okay, there is a segment of our state, well, and in our country in general, that they're pretty much low information voters. And it's not because of them not caring. It's they're too darn busy with the rest of their lives to and this is not an excuse. Voting is the one time, and I said this yesterday on the program, it's the one time that you get a say in how your government is run. And so not voting, it's your duty to vote. Granted, in the Constitution, it doesn't say you have to, but it is your duty to go vote, just like jury duty, just like anything else. It's your duty to do it, and you should. His last paragraph, I say enough with the name-calling, the false information, and the nasty for nasty's sake. Enough with the schlock that uses Wyoming voters as fundraising bait. Let's elect people who, for who they are and what they will do, not for some mysterious, never heard of them before organization ginned up to make voters mad. Now, I'm glad that he pointed that out, because there are a number of those folks, and it's political action committees that I believe have probably been around since the Liz Cheney day. They just really haven't done anything recently. But look at social media. There are a ton of nameless, faceless Facebook groups that, and all of them are attacking conservatives. One of them that is specific, is particularly nasty, is one called WYOHIPPO. I don't even know who that is. It's disgusting. I wouldn't go look at it. You're probably going to go look at it right now. But all of it is to portray conservatives in the most disgusting way possible. And it's truly terrible. But there's others. Wyoming Grit. I have my suspicions about who that is. But they haven't said much in the last little bit because they're lying. There's one called the Wyoming Freedom Journal, which is all AI content. And if you want to talk about spin, hey, whomever runs that, why don't you come on Cowboy State Politics and let's talk about it. We'll match wits, because everything that thing puts out is political spin, and none of it is actually backed up by through that. One of their stupid articles said that it was conservatives who pushed through the recalibration bill. Guess what? That was a 12-member committee, and the majority was not conservatives. It had people, Democrats, liberals. That was made up of pretty much every sector of the legislature. And so, yeah, it's total bullcrap. But, as far as Governor Gordon's op-ed, I actually agree with it. Now, I'm sure it's pointed towards conservatives, but he never calls them out. He never says this group or that group. He just says, in general, we should do away with the crappy campaigning, which I agree with. All right, we're going to take our second break, and it's a little bit early, but we've got Wyoming GOP Chairman Bryan Miller coming up after the break. So we'll go take a little siesta, and we'll be back and joined by Wyoming GOP Chairman Bryan Miller. Back in a minute. I never figure out which one of these ads has the long intro, but anyway, here you go. Are you sick to death of being told what to think? Maybe you don't even realize that it's happening. Freedom Caucus bad, big spending, big government, liberal, Republican good. Conservatives are bad and they want to starve little children. I have heard it all, my friends. We are way past the time when the news was just the news, if it ever was. But wouldn't it be nice if you had a news platform that was at least honest about what they were telling you? News on the news page, opinion on the opinion page. That's exactly what the Open Range Record is. Go to the website, openrangerecord.com. News, analysis, opinion, and investigative journalism. One more time, that website is openrangerecord.com. You can listen and watch Cowboy State Politics live on YouTube, Facebook, X, and on Rumble every Tuesday through Friday from 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pay attention to all that other block-headed, Borg-like so-called news if you want. But if you want to get the real story, watch Cowboy State Politics live. And now, back to the program. Welcome back to the program, Cowboy State Politics live on a Thursday. Thank you for watching the program. Thank you for everything you do for Cowboy State Politics. I really appreciate it. The podcast, this program, the Open Range Record. I really appreciate it. So we're joined now by Chairman of the Wyoming GOP, Mr. Bryan Miller. Chairman Miller, welcome to the program. How are you this morning?
Doing just fine. How are you doing, David?
We're doing great, man. 5 days to go before the election. What do you think?
Well, I think it's definitely been an interesting election cycle. With all the dark money that's come into the state, with all the infighting that we've had within the party, and all the angst that's been out there for quite some time, has finally come to a head. Add to that what the party has done by exerting our rights and our First and 14th Amendment rights. It's an interesting election cycle.
All right. So I guess first, it's been a while since you've been on the program. There's probably some of my viewers that don't know who you are or don't know much about you. Why don't you take a minute or two and just tell my audience about yourself?
Well, a little bit about me. Let's see. I spent 27 years in the military, the first 4 years of it being at the Air Force Academy in Colorado Springs. Graduated from high school here in Sheridan, Wyoming. That's where I'm at right now. And moved back after I got done with the military. Have built my own business now, a consulting firm that's been going since 2011. And I've been involved with the politics in the state since around 2013-ish timeframe when I
was going to say forever.
Yeah,
whatever.
It's been a long time now. I spent a couple of years getting established here, and then went and learned that while I was gone out of the state, a lot of things happened. That initially got involved because of what was going on with a censure with Governor Meade way back when. And I could not believe what our own party was doing, that our own party had internally was kind of threatening each other to keep that from happening. It's another long story. I'd love to spend some time on that with you someday. But that's what got me initially started. I ran for office a couple of times and was unsuccessful in those bids because I don't have the millions of dollars to do it. But for the amount of money I spent and the amount of time that I was on the trail, people said, "Hey, you did awfully darn good." So that got me motivated to try to figure out how to change the political scene in Wyoming, get away from the big establishment, get away from the good old boys club. And we've gotten that. We finally got that within the party. We're done with that. Now we're just trying to get rid of that out of our government here in Wyoming.
Now, one interesting thing about your history is, didn't you tell me that when you were in the Air Force, you flew flew Air Force One or one of the Air Force Ones?
No, I didn't fly the aircraft. What I did is I was initially an advance agent for Air Force One, so I would go out ahead of Air Force One wherever it went around the world, and we'd be out there a week or so prior, and we would prep the movement of the president anywhere around the world. Then I ended up running that program out of the Pentagon for 2 years. And I'll tell you, that is you talk about a high pressure program. That was a very high pressure program, but it was very well worth it. I worked under a couple of different presidents. The military does what the military does, regardless of who's president. And I got to see two completely different realms.
I bet.
One realm that under the Clinton administration, where they kind of acted like kings and queens, and then under the next administration that came in, under the Bush administration, they came in and they were a lot more business-like, a lot more like I would have expected a White House to be. So yeah, it was definitely an interesting job that I did for about almost 5 years total between the agent and being in charge of the program.
All right. So you mentioned, let's see here. You mentioned the division in the party, and I think that if you pay attention to like Wyoming politics at all, or to social media or anything, you can see it. So, what do you think is the cause of it?
What I think is the cause of it? Well, the cause is very obvious. You go back and you look at just the last 8 years, probably across the state. The Democratic Party has just fallen apart. It's gone from around 35% of the registered voters down to just around 11% right now of the registered voters are Democrats. Well, they had to go somewhere, and a lot of them came across to the Republican Party. It was interesting. A couple of the last cycle, I had received an email from a friend over in the Basin that had been sent around through the Democratic Party. And at the time, I didn't think a whole lot about it initially, but it made a lot of sense because for years, we've been down in front of the legislature asking them to change Title 22, make things different so that we don't have this whole crossover methodology. And what that email ended up saying, it was one of the leaders over in the Basin complaining to the rest of the group, going, look, for years now, we've been crossing over and interfering, or not interfering, they didn't say interfering. We've been crossing over and influencing the Republican Party primary. It's not working for us. Let's tell our people to come back and let's get a stronger party. And boy, I'm all for that. If they were out of the party and were actually doing what they believe, and they stood for what they really stand for, when you see it in their voting, we would have a much stronger state if we had two strong parties.
I absolutely agree with you. In fact, yesterday on the show, I went through all of the crossover voting numbers, from this election, and really it's a little bit more than 2,000 people that crossed over.
Sure.
2,000. Right. They're already in the Republican Party.
Yeah. You go back to the Cheney era when the whole big change with Liz Cheney.
Yeah,
and
2018, 2020. It was
in the tens of thousands that crossed over, and the state confirmed that. In Sheridan County, we had 1,087 crossovers that election. That was 17% of the people in our primary were not Republicans, and they swapped back pretty much immediately afterwards. And then over the years, they've all switched back because of the laws that were passed saying you can't just switch back and forth all the time.
All right. So for the last several elections, you and I have talked about how things are shaping up in the election. It seems like just about every election cycle, we have you on the program about the same time. And it's almost always to talk about the candidates that you're in favor of, or in this case, that the party supports. Could you tell my viewers, how did those endorsements go? I mean, you had a statewide meeting. How did that happen?
State level. So I'll start back at convention. At convention this year, we passed bylaws. We had some legislators and a judge say, hey, the party agrees that the system, the way it's set up, is the way it is, because look at your bylaws. Your bylaws say you're okay with it. Well, no, our bylaws have been designed to comply with state law for eons. As a matter of fact, we keep getting sued. You followed those cases. Year after year, we get sued for something else internally within the party because we don't supposedly comply with the state law. And most of the time we win those cases. It's very interesting there. But anyway, so in April of this year at our state convention, and actually going back to the county conventions, a few of the counties took a look at you versus San Francisco County Democratic Party and Republican Party and a bunch of other parties, a lawsuit they did in 1989. And we looked at it, and I explained it to a whole lot of people around the state, and a couple of counties decided to take that up and say, we need to move on this. So we went, and the bylaws got changed. We added the ability for the party to not only endorse, but to fund candidates in the primary, because that's what you states. Matter of fact, it was a unanimous decision by the court at the time saying that the parties have a right and an obligation to our voters, the people who are registered as Republicans and Democrats and all the other parties. We have an obligation to determine who our best standard bearers are for the party. And in order to get that out, that the message out, you do have to spend money to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So Wyoming statute only allows an endorsement. It does not allow us to go ahead and spend money to get the word out. So we decided we were going to change that. We're going to reassert our First and 14th Amendment rights going back 37 years. And so we changed our bylaws. And in those bylaws, it gave some specifics on what things need as a minimum to be looked at if you're going to endorse candidates. We decided not to spend any funds this year because we're not going to violate state law, even though all kinds of people are saying, you're violating.
Right, you're not.
We are not even close. We're doing it intentionally to avoid that because we don't want to affect the case that we have, which I'd love to talk about that before we leave too.
Sure.
Because we've had some our initial response from the state back. Anyway, so we developed bylaws. Those bylaws came out. They weren't exactly what I expected, but they were what the body wanted. So 300 plus delegates, and there's 600 delegates and alternates, but 300 plus delegates on the floor, and in 2 days of discussions came up with the rules and our bylaws on how we were going to go ahead and do endorsements for the party. Coming out of convention, the rules were set. We then proceeded to go through that process. That process required the party, and it's interesting the way it was worded. It required the state party to develop the endorsement process more than just what was in the bylaws. So we had to hold a meeting. And at that meeting, we determined what else was going to be a part of that process. Once that meeting was done, then we had another meeting where we actually did the endorsement after a committee had been developed or determined by the body to go ahead and do the analysis. And once that analysis was done, they passed that on to the State Central Committee. The State Central Committee met. We debated for hours on end.
That never happens at a Republican meeting.
Yeah. And actually we had a member of the press there that was there the entire time, which was great because it got long and tedious. Because of the way the process worked, we ended up having to do voice votes on everything because the electronic system that we were attempting to use just was not going to work for everybody. So it ended up being a long night. We came up with the candidates that we were going to endorse, and we put out an announcement on who we were endorsing, and that announcement is on our website, and it got out through the press, and that's the way we went through that endorsement process. We had some complaints afterwards initially. We had some complaints from one candidate going, hey, the military is being short-sheeted on this if you're a military candidate, which I find interesting because, like I said, I spent 27 years in the military, and I also ran for office, and there are some disadvantages coming into this as military because you're not as well known. It takes some time to get people to know who you are when you move back to the state that you've been, that you came from. And it took me a while to get back to people really knowing who I am. And that's why I'm here where I'm at now, because people know who I am now. And then we had some complaints as well that we were just looking at money. Well, that's not. You look at the what the Central Committee passed and what was going to be considered. It was a yes, no. Has somebody contributed to the party? And it even went beyond money. It went beyond, is this an individual actually participating with the party on anything? I'll make a note here on this. We have 160 some people running for statewide, not statewide, but for state house and
legislature.
Yeah. And of those people, there are probably, I bet you 2/3 of them have never even talked to the party.
Mm-hmm.
Crazy. Yet they put an R behind their name. They throw that R behind their name because they know that the public trusts the R. They trust that we're doing our job. And state law for 37 years has kept us from doing that job. And we are reasserting our rights. Sometime when you have time, we'll go through the whole case. But that's where we're at. We put the endorsements out there. We would love to be able to spend money to put ads out there, but we can't. But the nice thing is when you have, podcasts like this, and you have other people out there on Facebook and doing other things, they can spread the word as well, and that doesn't cost us anything. So the word gets out there, just not as effectively as these huge ads that are on TV.
Right.
I'm sure you've seen all those dark money.
It's been
ads.
incredible, man.
The amount of money spent this time around is just ridiculous. I've got this right here. This is all of the things that have come in the mail to my house.
Wow, that's a bigger pile than mine, man.
Yeah, it's
well,
huge.
and it's I joke all the time, Bryan, that other people get mailers that I don't get. Well, only the smart candidate is going to look for a couple of names and say, yeah, that guy doesn't need this. Yeah, definitely don't send it to him. But still, I've got a pretty significant pile. So, a question for you. I think that just me personally, the folks that I've talked to, people are pretty well done with all of the campaign mailers. Do you think that those campaign mailers are effective? And if so, if not, what do you think is the most? We all know going door to door, but I'm talking media. What do you think is the most effective way to campaign?
Well, I'll tell you that at this point, I get calls all day long. Our executive director, she gets calls constantly. People are just they're upset. There are so many mailers, so many this. They're all attack mailers. They're all filled with lies. This one's saying this one's lying. It confuses people more than anything. I think they have outlived their usefulness per se. This lawsuit that we have filed to get the parties, the major parties, by the way, because the minor parties don't have to comply with the rules that we're fighting. The major parties will eliminate a lot of this confusion that's out there. When the major parties can actually talk about the candidates, when we can do more than just hold a forum or hold a debate, when we can actually talk about what came out of that debate, when we can help people understand, when we can do investigations, this whole Graham Plattner thing up in Maine.
Oh, crazy.
That the party did a background check on that. They just didn't get the information out. Well, guess what? In Wyoming, we can't even do background checks because we might find something on one candidate that's not over another candidate, and we can end up getting in trouble for that. The parties have a reason for existing, and that is to get the word out on people who support our platform. I'll throw that out here. This is our new one. That support our platform. That is our job. We end up having almost 2,000 precinct committee men and precinct committee women across the state of Wyoming from the Republican Party that are elected literally from the neighborhoods. One person, a man or a woman, for every 125 registered Republicans in the state. So we have around 2,000 of them out there. Those individuals then come together. They create the county central committees. That county central committee then sets up precinct caucuses. And at those precinct caucuses, any registered Republican can come and be a part of those caucuses. They provide inputs on what we're going to do with our platforms, any changes we want in our bylaws, any resolutions. They provide all that at those events. And that increases the number to 3 times the amount of people who are involved from the 210,000 registered Republicans we have in the state. So now you got about 6,000 or 7,000 people who have had some input at the beginning of the process. And this is a 2-year process. Every 2 years we go through this. And then after that, we have our county conventions. They're all elected. All the people who go to that are elected from within the party, from those thousands of people, and other people are added. And we end up getting somewhere probably in around the 8 to 10,000 number of people who have participated in the process. Then we have state convention, and we had 300 plus delegates and 300 plus alternates that were also selected for that convention. And that's how we end up with the process that we do. And for those 16 months that process takes, every 2 years, we've been thwarted by the state, by them saying, hey, yes, you have this process that says you're supposed to pick, find people that agree with your platform, to get them elected, to go through that whole process. And then at the end go, oh, but you can't participate in the primary that we, the state, force you to participate in. That force
it's bizarre, man.
Yeah, they force our candidates to go raise money to beat the crud out of each other. And then the one who's still standing at the end gets to go raise more money and fight against a candidate from the other side. And then even fight candidates that don't even have to go through that process. They only have to raise money once. It's ridiculous. It's a horrible process. And Wyoming and North Dakota are the only two states that are stuck in this mode, because we have never, even though we've tried for years to get our statutes changed, it has been convenient and useful for our senior electeds in particular to not have to go through a process where they actually participate with the party that they put the label on behind themselves. So
yeah, it's interesting to me, and I've with several of the folks here in Sheridan. I mean, you've been pretty busy, so I don't know that you've been there, but the conversation is okay. Like, how would that work? So if we get the law changed and like in Bryan Miller's perfect world, what would that look like? From the end of the filing period to the convention to, if the Republican Party could say, okay, this person over here follows the platform, this person over here does not. Give me an idea of what that would look like.
Here's the so that this round was a little different than I foresee things happening in the future. There are a bunch of different ways that it happens across the rest of the states. Some states hold conventions, 2-3 day conventions, where all the candidates come and they decide who they're going to support coming in. Or they either decide who they're going to support in the primary, or they decide who is going to go on the primary ballot. More than one. I foresee that being what happens in Wyoming. In Wyoming, neither major party has the ability to say that somebody can't go on the ballot because they don't agree with the party. And that is one of the fundamental things in the U case, in the U versus San Francisco County case. The to determine if somebody upholds the party's principles. Otherwise, they're not a political party. They are nothing. And like I said, that the U case, the unanimous decision, they say that in the case. This is the case. So what I foresee is ultimately we'll probably end up having some changes. Every chair across the nation told me this first year is going to suck. It's going to be brutal, but you guys have to do this. And we had to do it this cycle in the midterm versus doing it in the presidential cycle. So we had to go and get this thing started, and we did it the way the body wanted to do it from the get-go. And it's a little rough around the edges, but we followed the processes that we've set out, and I've had very few complaints actually from the candidates. I had a couple of candidates that came out and they're upset about it, and I think that's because they realize that they've never participated with the party, and they probably weren't going to end up getting a nod anyway. So I can't help that. That's their own issue. We had candidates just refuse to actually fill out the survey that we sent them,
and then complain later that they didn't get the endorsement.
Complain later they didn't get it, and one of them in particular said, "No, I can't do this because I'll be violating the law because." The party's violating the law on this if I participate. Well, that's, first off, it's not true. We're not violating the law. And secondly, I find it interesting that candidate has participated in all of our statewide debates that we had. Huh. Funny.
Weird.
You say what we're doing is illegal, and then you go ahead and say I can't do it because it's illegal, and then you participate anyway. So
Then you do it anyway.
Mouth. Yeah, I that bothers me.
Bryan, did you? One question I've been wondering, and I'm glad we could get you on the program.
Sure.
So, have you taken any flack for the party not endorsing Trump's pick for governor?
What we got from the White House staff when we talked to them, because there's a long story behind that. I could talk to you about that too. It would take an hour for us to go through that process. When that first happened, people were angry. I had, in a matter of days, I had hundreds of people contacting me. I had people stopping me at gas stations down in Casper as I'm driving through, going, "Hey, you're the Republican chair, aren't you? Why did you tell Trump to endorse this individual?" And I'm like, well, first off, you never asked. Nobody ever asked. Matter of fact, there were only a couple of people across the state who apparently had an input to that. And they are not at anywhere near the level that we are. And they provided some input. Trump said, got it, and went with it. People were angry. They're like, we don't even know who's going to be on the ballot. And that individual hasn't even announced what is going on. So I went back. I talked to folks in D.C. I said, what happened here? In August of the previous year, we had talked, and you said that you guys would talk to the county or the state parties before you did any of this stuff. They said, well, that's just not the way it worked out this time. Okay.
Uh-huh.
But then I came back in November, and I explained the same thing to you. Our state laws don't allow for certain things. The party, first off, is not going to be able to do what you want every state to do when an endorsement happens. We can't. And here's why. And I explained it to him in August of 2025. I explained it to him in November 25. And I explained it to him again in February of 26. This is where we're at. And all I got was, well, you guys figure it out. So we did. So we filed our lawsuit. We are going to figure it out. We're going to make it happen. So if I caught flack, the only words that have been given and that have been said directly to myself and a couple of our other senior folks are, we hope that the state party doesn't come on opposite sides of the president. That's all that was said. There was no nothing else. I've heard nothing else about it. And that's more than I expected to hear. I don't know what else to say about it other than
Fair enough.
I wish they would have consulted us up front, because we would have said, don't do anything until after the filing period.
Right.
Because it makes no sense. People in Wyoming do not like to be told by outside organizations or outside people who they're going to vote for, especially before they even know who is going to be on the ballot.
Well, and one thing that I found interesting, I mean, I was happy with the choice that the Central Committee made in the endorsement. But one thing that I found, refreshing is, like, I know that, well, I pretty much know everybody in the Central Committee, but a lot of them are, pretty serious, Trump fans that, and I wouldn't want to say that, whatever the president says they're going to go along with, but more often than not, yeah. But there's also a contingent of the Central Committee that thinks, in a little bit different direction. And so I was a little surprised how the endorsement came out, but I was pleased at the same time, because I think that it shows the independence of the Central Committee.
That's a good way to put it.
That's a group of people that if you try to tell them what to do, they'll go in the opposite direction.
Well, it's interesting. It's at the RNC level. The 168 is what we're called. All of the RNC members from all the states and the territories. The 168 has not always agreed with where the RNC is going of late, and that wouldn't have happened years ago. That's something that is actually, I don't want to say is being allowed, but is actually occurred in under this administration. And folks will speak their mind. You didn't see that in the past. It was always a rubber stamp. You're not seeing that now. And the state central committee, it's made up of 74 members from around the state. They all come from the counties. They've all been elected from the county level on up, going all the way back to those precinct committee people who were elected in their neighborhoods by the 210,000 plus registered Republicans. And those individuals are thinking about Wyoming. They're thinking about us here. Yes, we look at what's going on in DC, but we're the state party. We're not the national party. I'm a part of both. I'm part of the RNC. So is our national committee man and national committee woman. And so we have that piece that we look at, but we are looking at the state as a whole, and the county parties are looking at the counties as a whole, and everyone is doing their job, and they do it very specifically to their area, and the needs of their constituents in those areas. So we like you, I was surprised at what happened in February with the amount of people that came out and just said, we're not going to support anything. And most of them have come back. I said, you know what? It's too important. We can't let the Dems who have crossed over into the party actually choose our candidates in this primary election. So yeah, we're back. We're not happy. In some cases, we're not happy with certain candidates for what they've done and said, but look at the alternative. We're gonna stick with certain candidates and go that route. And I've been very pleased with the Central Committee as a whole. We've always ended up having somewhere around the 50 or between 50 and 64 of the 74 have pretty much been on board for years. That's what we ended up with this time. We had some folks complaining, that if you watch that night, the event, when we did the endorsements, there was a block of candidates who just voted to not vote. I can't think of the term.
Abstained or whatever.
Abstained. Yeah, they were abstaining, and they thought they were making a statement. By gosh, we're abstaining. We don't like this process because we think we're violating the law or some reason. I'm not even sure what the real reason was, other than the fact that they just weren't happy. And you saw the same vote of 13 or 14 people every time. Boom, abstain, 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 until one vote. There was a recommendation by an individual to not support a candidate, to actually oppose a candidate, which our bylaws allow. And boy, did they step out of their little high and mighty on the side. Hey, I'm not participating. To, oh my gosh, we got to save that candidate. And that was interesting. That
couldn't imagine which candidate that was.
Yeah, that was a very, very telling moment.
So how do you think the election is going to turn out, Bryan? You think you think we're going to have more turnout this time? I mean, you're kind of the guy that watches all that.
Yeah, I will tell you that we need that. We need people. You'll notice that we've put out some ads on Get Out the Vote quite a bit here lately, because I'm hearing from other state chairs that the people are not coming out to vote across the nation. There's a few states where they've come out and they've stepped up, but most states, the apathy is there. And this time around, I worry about that because of all of these ads. We're going to do a hot wash after this election cycle, and we're trust me, for all those folks out there who are doing all of these ads, all of these PACs, we are watching you and we are noting who you are, where you are, and vast majority of them are either out of Casper, Wyoming, or out of Washington, D.C. And so we've been logging them all, checking up on them all, and we will show the people of Wyoming why or how we got to where we are. And I'm going to go back and reiterate. If the parties were allowed to do their job in the state, if we were allowed to do what is done in other states, you would not be seeing what we're seeing right now. No. Because people would have local folks who are on the ground here in Wyoming, knowing what's going on, knowing the candidates, seeing what they've done, how they've done, what they believe in, folks would concentrate on paying attention to them, not all of these mailers that are out there saying whatever they're saying about every candidate out there.
Well, it's interesting. You go across the state, and Wyoming has this reputation of you voted for Trump, 70%, in the last election, must all be, pro-Trump. But if you go across the state, like you'll find some pretty big differences in, not only the people that make up the county central committee, but the county as a whole, right? Sheridan, as you well know, is very different from Casper or Bighorn County, or everybody's different than Teton County, but or Sweetwater County. There's another good example. Not nearly as conservative as Sheridan, and so I think that a lot of if county parties were able to participate in the primary election, honestly, I think that you would see a bigger difference in Republican candidates than we do right now, because now it's pretty much just like two different groups, and it's pretty hard to tell the difference.
Yeah, and it's the interesting thing with that is that we have had for far too long the ability to have the state basically say, parties, you can't decide who is in your party. It's up to the individual to decide whether they are A or B. Well, that sounds awful Democrat to me right now. My identity is who I am. Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Your identity is who you are, but how everyone else sees you is probably a whole lot different than the way you see yourself. And that is how the state has looked at candidates. They've said, hey, if you want to put an R behind your name, you go ahead and put an R behind your name. You can get on the ballot. Cost you $50 or $150, whatever the rate is now. That's how you get on the ballot. You don't even have to be associated with the party. Don't worry about it. That is ridiculous. It makes absolutely no sense in the world. No, like I said, there's only 2 states in the nation that do this, and North Dakota is following our lead. They're coming around the same way, attempting to get their laws changed because they have essentially the same laws we had, which we essentially had the same laws California had back when. We need to get those changed. I think if we did, once that is done, we will see a huge difference across the state. We will see a state party that, well, I'll put it this way. It's easier to describe it this way. The R in Wyoming means something. People trust that we are doing our job. And we are doing our job up to the point that we're allowed to do. And then we can't finish the job because the state says, sorry, you can't participate. We'll let you do all this stuff. Oh, and by the way, their big arguments. Well, you guys get to fill vacancies. You guys get to
which has nothing to do with the other part.
Nothing to do with this whole process. That process has actually been looked at nationally as a wonderful process because it saves the state an awful lot of money, and it does. I'd love to talk about that at some point. I testified to that at the legislature last fall, and pointed out just how much the volunteer time of all the people across the state who are involved with the party, the volunteer time alone is huge. If the state had to put on every special election for every candidate that's dropped out there, everyone who's quit, or the fiasco that happened over in Weston County.
Yeah.
I know you covered that, and we're watching that like a hawk too, because that is something where there's a problem in that county.
Yeah.
And
well, it's continuing.
Yeah. But bottom line, we need the people of Wyoming, the Republicans and the Democrats need to be able to depend on their party to do the job that they are set to do. And right now, state law does not allow for that.
All right. Well, the way that we change all that is we win elections, and we're all going to find out next Tuesday. So, Bryan, if folks want to get a hold of you, how do they do that?
Well, they can get a hold of me by sending an email to chairman@wyoming.gop, or they can call 307-772-1077. I'm happy to talk to folks. I've gotten I get calls all the time. So I'd certainly they hear that, or they can go if they want to see what's going on with the party. We updated our website. It's a lot more effective now, a lot more information.
It's a lot
available.
better.
And we did that just after we held our convention as well to show the new face of the party. Please go there, take a look at the announcement we made about the candidates that we are supporting, that we had endorsed, because it's important. I know each county's got their own way they're doing it as well. Some endorsed, some didn't. Just depends on the county. But take a look at those. See who your party is actually endorsing, because we have not just willy-nilly decided to pick some names out of a hat. We have looked at those individuals. We have screened them for their ability and for what they've done with our platform, and how they voted if they're in the legislature. Take a look. If you trust in the party that you have signed up for, trust in the folks that you've elected to do that work in the party, and get out there and vote. We've got to get people out there and vote. The more people that come out and vote, the more likely we are to have a good outcome.
Yeah, too big to rig. Well, Bryan, thank you for spending some time with me this morning. I appreciate it, and I'm sure we'll be talking before the election. Thanks again.
Good. Thanks, David. Out here.
All right, here in just a second, we'll come back and we'll finish up the program. But first, an absolutely outrageous profit timeout. The calendar says that it's summer, and you believe it. Well, that's just so cute. But you obviously haven't lived here very long, have you? And you probably think that the weather is just going to continue to warm up. You don't have to worry about snow or ice or 30-degree temperatures anymore. In case you've forgotten, this is Wyoming, my friend, and that sort of thinking doesn't work here. 1 minute, it could be 75 and sunny, and 10 minutes later, snow. Whatever the weather, you need a pair of socks that'll keep your feet cool and dry even on the hottest of summer days. And if you happen to run into that freak midsummer snowstorm, trust me, it's happened. I've seen it. You'll stay nice and toasty warm. Well, your feet anyway. To get you a pair, go to the website, thebuffalowoolco.com. Trust me, you won't be disappointed. These are the finest socks that I've ever put on my feet. Are you one of those people that said something like this before Trump became president?
I have a house in Spain that is going to be ready right after the election.
Siberia.
Nova Scotia.
I'm definitely moving to Canada.
Straight to hell. Iceland.
France.
Asia's pretty cool.
And has the last year and a half been more than you could bear? Well, if it has, you've come to the right place. Call my friend Rebecca Bextel at eXp Realty. She has her fingers on the pulse of the real estate market all across the state of Wyoming. Last year, she sold around $30 million worth of property. Everything from small residential properties all the way up to big giant ranches. So if you've got to get the heck out of Dodge, if you've got to be gone Johnson because you can't stand that Trump is the president, call Rebecca Bextel. Her phone number is 307-699-3519. Let me say that one more time for you in case you missed it. 307-699-3519.
I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day, don't you? Well, I can show you how. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. A new day, a new way. Watch out, I'm only gonna get stronger. I've never felt the freedom like I do. I feel stronger every day. I'm only gonna get stronger.
Cowboy state politics is only getting stronger. This program is expanding faster than, well, nobody ever really thought it would. The Cowboy State Politics Live, the Cowboy State Politics Podcast, and of course, the Open Range Record. Thank you for All right, so we're back, my friend. Sorry for that brief interruption. I don't know what's going on with this, with the internet connection. I've been thinking about, we've been talking about switching to Starlink. I don't know if that's, if any of you have any experience with that, let me know. Man, it's got to be better than what we've got, because I know what we're paying for isn't at all what we're getting. So if you got any experience with that, let me know. Now, as Bryan mentioned, and thank you to Bryan, Chairman Miller, for taking 30 minutes and visiting with us. He's a busy guy, and so appreciate the half hour that he spent with us. Well, there are a ton. And if you notice, the endorsements from the media, and I'm going to call them endorsements because that's literally what the media has turned into, definitely the cow pie, when they go in and stealth edit an article and don't tell you that they've changed it. They try to make it look like they didn't make a mistake when they absolutely did. Only after this program called them on it, which, I mean, come on, what else? As much as they won't admit it, they absolutely listen to this program. But that's the media, man. It's advocacy. It is rarely do they back anything up with facts. And when they can, they're not going to tell you the truth. And so yesterday was an attempt to try to convince you that Eric Barlow's fundraising was all grassroots, when the truth is he took a heck of a lot of money from one political action committee in particular, and it ended up being more money than almost, if not more, almost more money than one of the candidates in the race raised in total, if that tells you anything. I mean, it's a good friend of mine, David Holland, always says that money is the mother's milk of politics, and that's true. But it also tells you a heck of a lot about the people that are running for office. It tells you, I mean, who you've climbed into bed with. Not to say that, and see, here's the thing. Just because a candidate takes a donation from one group or another doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to do their bidding. That's the narrative that the mainstream liberal press in Wyoming wants you to believe, that whomever you take a donation from, they're going to do your bidding. I don't think that that's true. However, what I will tell you is a candidate is not going to take money from an organization that he fundamentally disagrees with. You're probably not going to see a conservative candidate in the state take money from the Wyoming Education Association. That's probably not going to happen. Not say it hasn't happened, because, by the way, the Secretary of State's office website was down this morning, which is why we haven't talked a lot about campaign fundraising, because I couldn't look at it this morning during show prep. But anyway, not saying it hasn't happened, but I think that it is probably highly unlikely. Similarly, if you look at all the associations, they're all endorsing one specific group of candidates. So here in Sheridan, Ryan Kultiska and Micah Sturdivant, both are borderline socialists, if not full-blown. They got endorsements from all sorts of the associations. Why? Because they're all big government people. And the folks that are running against them, the conservatives, they didn't get any of those endorsements. And here's the argument that the media makes. Well, all these people, they got endorsements all over the place. They got to be the good candidate. Except if all those organizations are rotten to the core, which most of them are. And if you spend any time in the Capitol, you'll figure it out. Who is, advocating on your behalf and who is not. So, when you can, get on the Secretary of State's website and look at that. Now, there is, let's see here. Well, there's one article I wanted to get to. Let's see. Here we go. Wildpile. It would seem that Wildpile cannot get past the fact that a campaign donation is a constitutionally protected expression of free speech. They can't do it. They don't want to do it. They're physically incapable of understanding that. And they're still hung up on this whole check thing, thinking that one big article is going to make the difference between what happens on Tuesday, which I would argue that most people have made up their mind. They've seen just enough TV ads and got enough stuff crammed into their mailbox that they figured out who they're going to vote for. So one article, however abusive it might be, is not going to make the difference. But Wildfile has a piece out, and it's entitled Republican Legislative Candidates Cashed Checkgate Checks, New Campaign Records Show. Now, there's a couple of items in here that are absolutely 100% not true. One of those is the assertion that if you took a check from Don Grasso, who, by the way, is a really nice guy, and he really cares about this state. I've met him a couple of times, and just a super guy. One of the cool things he does is every year he takes a group of inner city school children. I mean, we're talking about like inner city kids that, if it were not for him, probably would never leave the neighborhood. And he scoops them up, puts them on a plane, and brings them out to Wyoming. And they spend, I think they spend a week here. But one of the first things that he does is he takes them to the custom hat shop in Jackson, which, by the way, if you've never been there, pretty cool place. And he buys them a cowboy hat. You see, most of the people that, the kids that he brings out here have never really had anything nice. They've never had, something as nice as a custom hat. And the lesson is, all right, I'm going to get you something that's really nice, and I'm going to teach you how to take care of it. That's what the lesson is. And he has done that. I think he told me that I know that he spent millions of dollars on charities that help inner city school kids. So he brings all these kids out here and gives them something nice. They have a great time, go horseback riding, and just hang out in Wyoming. Well, he told me one of the times he did that, he went to their graduation. And at one point during the graduation, they all stood up, took off their graduation caps, and put on their cowboy hats and wore them for the rest of the graduation. Now, remember, these are inner city kids in the middle of Chicago, and that's what they did. So that's Don Grasso, man. He is incredibly charitable, and just an awesome person. So here is the allegation that that WyoFile makes. Let's see if I can find it here. Yeah, here we go. Okay, so their allegation is that if you accepted a campaign check from Don Grasso after the legislative session, which, by the way, remember, this whole check thing, the reason why they flipped their gourd about those campaign donations, which are constitutionally protected, is they happened during the session. Okay, so that was the whole thing. Happened on the floor, which, by the way, there wasn't a law broke, there wasn't a rule broke at the time, wasn't any of those things. Like it was not anything that hadn't happened probably thousands of times before in the Wyoming legislature. The only difference is this time there was a picture of something that it was not a crime at all. So the allegation now from WyoFile is if you took money from Don Grasso after the legislative session, if you were 400 miles away from the Capitol building, that apparently now that is a checkgate check. So, for example, let me just read you these couple of paragraphs. Other named lawmakers, including Bear, Brown, Nyman, Locke, Ide, and Jennings, were not asked to appear before the panel because they didn't have anything to do with it, because the scope of its investigation was limited to checks distributed on the floor. And again, that wasn't a crime. At that point, Bear told a reporter that he accepted a check from Bextel, but not on the House floor. So what? That is a constitutionally protected campaign donation, Maggie Mullen. And then it continues, quote, I don't know about a check, Jennings told a reporter on February 16th. I heard rumors about that through the papers. Jennings received a $1,500 donation from Grasso on April 13th, according to the campaign finance report. Other candidates listed a variety of dates in their filings, including Bob Ide, who reported a $1,500 check on May 27th. I did not respond to WyoFile's request for comment. So the implication here, of course, is that if you accepted any donation from Don Grasso, that apparently you are somehow implicated in the whole checkgate thing. It's not true, my friends. That is a constitutionally protected expression of free speech. That's what that is. And it doesn't matter if somebody took a campaign donation from X or Y or person, it doesn't really matter. Maybe WyoFile should focus on campaign donations to the tune of almost $10,000 taken by Ryan Koltiska from a variety of big government organizations. Maybe you should investigate those. Or perhaps, just perhaps, maybe, you should investigate the campaign donations taken by Robert Short from high-profile Democrats in Teton County, namely Liz Storr and her husband, Luther Probst. Maybe you should investigate that. Why is a supposed Republican hanging out with Democrats in Jackson? Seems like a more interesting story to me. Or maybe you should investigate all of the campaign donations that were given to so-called Republican legislators during COVID, in which, interestingly, all of them voted the same way that the medical lobby would want them to vote. That's interesting. Maybe investigate Landon Brown, who took a campaign donation from a medical lobbying organization the first day of the COVID special session. Maybe you should investigate that. Maybe that, and interesting and weird. Landon Brown voted against everything that would have restrained government power that day, and in fact almost insisted, through his votes of course, that you be forced to jab a piece of metal into your arm and take a vaccine. And he took a check the very first day of the session in which he did that. Maybe you should investigate that. But a campaign donation outside of the legislative session, which, by the way, that's not a problem anyway. There isn't any law that prevents that. Now, the legislature did pass a rule, but there isn't a law against it, nor was there a rule or a law when any of this happened. So maybe you should investigate how important it is that candidates be able to raise money. Maybe that's and perhaps you should pick up a copy of the Constitution. I don't know, Maggie Mullen. But the insinuation by the Wyoming media, namely Wildfile in this case, is absolutely incredible. That they don't really care about the facts. They don't care about their insinuations. They don't care about any of it. The truth is, they just want to make conservatives look bad. That's the whole goal. That's why this thing was published, 6 days before the primary election. That's why they did it. And it's for the very same reason that the Cow Pie went in and edited their article and didn't point it out to anybody, because they don't want you to know that they were advocating on behalf of very liberal people. That's their whole goal. You see, the Wyoming media is not interested in facts. They're interested in money and power, and mainly money, but money and power. And the bigger government gets, the more money they get. And I mean, it's just one continuous cycle. So why it doesn't make any sense why any of these organizations would support a conservative, because, conservatives are going to say, hey, government's too big. All right, my friends. Well, we've pretty much burned up another busy broadcast, 2 hours on the program. Thank you for watching. Thank you to Chairman Miller for spending 30 minutes with us. Tomorrow on the program, Open Line Friday. We only got a couple of shows until the primary election. And so hopefully, if I can get on the Secretary of State's website this afternoon, I'll be able to do some campaign finance research, and I can show you some of the dirty little secrets that are hidden in there. I'm sure there are plenty of them. But for now, my friends, from the base of the Bighorns at the Cowboy State Politics Studio, I'm David Iverson, and this is Cowboy State Politics. See you tomorrow, my friends. Have a great afternoon.